question and answer session. So feel free to engage with us throughout the program tonight, and we will deal with all questions and queries at the end of the session. So without further ado, allow me to introduce and welcome our CEO at SAICE, Mr. Vishal Lakshman. Over to you, Vishal.
Thank you, Intellect. I trust you can hear me clearly.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all that have joined our call and wanting to understand more about bridging the gap. My intention is to create context around this webinar and to give perhaps some more insights into why we are having such a webinar. Sorry, Dion, is the echo still happening? I see a message from Dion saying that it's echoing. In Tabalang, is that happening from my side as well?
I can hear you perfectly, Vishal. Dion, if you can just check on your connection, perhaps that's the issue, but I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, let me carry on. So when we speak about bridging the gap, it's meant to be in two contexts. One is literally, and that will come later on in the presentation, but more at a figurative or philosophical level in terms of bridging the gap. And the intention for having this webinar is to explore the concepts related and attributes related to youth, as well as the attributes and concepts related to technology. And that's the gap that I would like to see us bridge, if we can even start that already. So as it pertains to bridging the gap, I think it's more important to understand the value proposition that youth present themselves or present our mainstream economy, our society, and our continent overall. And let me start by giving some insights into that. As it pertains to youth and technology, I'll start with the youth description first. As it pertains to youth, there's a need for a critical consciousness, and that consciousness will be sort of elaborated a little bit more as I go through what I'm going to say just now. But overall, youth have the ability to alter oppressive social and political systems and to experience liberation. And that's a very big, bold statement. And I'll tell you why I say that. Because Africa, our continent, has more than 60% of the total population below the age of 25. So that should tell us something about how important and valuable attributes and initiatives related to youth are applicable. So as currently, we have extreme youth unemployment in South Africa, as well as on the continent. In my opinion, youth are marginalized for various reasons. They are not regarded as participants in mainstream economy, and this is for absurd reasons. And I'll say why I think it's absurd. In some contexts, they are perceived as not as active citizens, and I'll tell you what that means now. Youth are not big consumers. In other words, they haven't built up wealth as yet, in many cases, and I use this in the broadest context. So they don't have large accumulations of wealth, and they are not large consumers of products and services. They're also deemed to be not knowledgeable enough about many concepts related to the adult generation. And these three are the absurdities that I speak of. Youth bounce between protesting and apathy. However, youth are the majority on the continent. And that is, if you can understand what I've just said, you will start to appreciate what opportunities are being missed by our adult leadership. And to some extent, I am part of that, and I will be also, to some extent, criticizing myself in process. There's a lack of focus on youth participation, and it's perhaps evidenced by the 60% of our overall population that is unemployed and are categorized as youth. There are few opportunities for youth to seize the day, and this is what I would like to talk about. And therefore, we speak of technology as just one of them. So there are some motivations to consider as you apply your mind to the presentation that's coming after this. Due to the technology that's available, youth are learning very differently as it applies to social interactions and technology-mediated activities. So by implication, that in technology-mediated participation, youth are more engaged and will continue to learn with technology by their side forever going forward. And this has allowed youth to figure things out for themselves, enjoy tinkering with technology, ability to work across people in groups, ease of collaboration, and learning via multiple medias. And there's a new one. Youth are good at context switching and savvy at developing relationships with technology systems. So youth are also best at learning through discovery, which means there are new forms of reasoning, which includes objects, text, codes, tools, etc., which youth are able to integrate very much easier than the adult generation. So in summary, I would say that in many respects, youth may not realize it, but you have the ability to access, absorb, interpret, process, and use information fundamentally differently to previous generations. And therein lies the opportunity. So your knowledge is but through personal, situational, and social dimensions that build up the knowledge of what I would say is available within our youth of this generation. And as it applies to civil engineering and BIM, for example, this is a form of technology-mediated learning. And that is why we are having this discussion today of how we can exploit the opportunity for youth involvement and partnering with technology that's available, and to use this format and this platform as the opportunity to create the consciousness and the awareness that you may or may not have had that lies within yourself, and the immense potential that youth have as it pertains to technology and the future in which they were participating to improve society. And I would appreciate that we pay particular attention to the presentation coming forth as it pertains to how best to deploy technology in our civil engineering industry. Thank you, Chair. I'd leave it there in terms of creating context. And I think I would now start with the introduction of Shoaib, who is going to make the next presentation. Shoaib has a great passion for design, infrastructure, technology, and his passion has gained him recognition as a champion of BIM for civil infrastructure, being ranked amongst the best recognized civil infrastructure design specialists in Africa and abroad. Shoaib is in the process of completing his master's in civil engineering and is affiliated with EXA and SAICE, and is an Autodesk certified instructor, international keynote speaker, and webinar host. He has used his civil engineering experience and BIM design expertise to help many companies and consultants across the world design more efficiently, intelligently, and economically. At Baker Baynes, he's involved with numerous projects involving BIM for civil infrastructure, GIS, CDEs, reality capture, scan to BIM, as well as VR and visualization. I'd like to hand over to Shoaib now to proceed with his part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Vishal, and for those wise and concise words that you had shared with us. Let me share my screen and then we can get on with the session for today. Okay, so thank you everyone and welcome, and thanks for joining this good event this afternoon, where we're going to be looking at bridging the gap, BIM knowledge and industry expertise. So let us have a look at what we're going to be discussing today. Before actually jumping into that, let me give you some context as to where I come from. I work at Baker Baynes here, based in Johannesburg, South Africa, and we are technology consultants that work in a variety of spaces, be it in the AEC, so architecture, engineering, or construction space, or the PDM, that's standing for product design and manufacturing, We also partner and are involved in a lot of projects that are involved called Scan to BIM, where it incorporates reality capture, be it on the site or within buildings. We also look at technologies that enhance civil infrastructure design. So as Vishal has said, using technology as the medium to better ourselves, not only as the youth, but as an industry, we are firm believers of these. And our motto is we solve our customers' problems through digital transformation, helping them to design and make a better world. And I think that ties in exactly to our topics today. Again, we have a lot of segments that we do specialize, but as you can see on the screen, there's a wealth of knowledge, expertise, and help that we could provide to the civil infrastructure industry. So let's look at the main topics of today. We're going to start off with BIM. What is its origin? Like, where did it come from? How did it evolutionize, as well as a professional perspective? We're thereafter going to be jumping into the education portion of it, and thereafter looking at how more opportunities have arisen because of this application of this methodology. What are the window to new opportunities? Then we're going to conclude, and then we're going to tackle the Q&A. So let's start off with the BIM origin, evolution, and professional perspective. The past, present, and future of BIM. So before you apply anything, it's always good to apply context to a situation, why you would use a methodology. Just as when you study to become a civil engineer, you need to know the theoretical as well as the grounding as to why you would apply a certain solution. This is the same manner or the same approach that we are going to be using today. So BIM was envisaged by Douglas C. Engelbart, who was an engineer, inventor, and early computer and internet pioneer. And he had this vision, this epiphany to say how the future could look like from a much more intelligent way of working. And this was actually highlighted in his paper titled Augmenting Human Intellect. You can find it online quite easily. It is quite amazing to see that the vision held at this time, which was in 1962. Let me repeat that, 1962, this ideology was born. And in those inverted snippets that you see on the screen, he basically describes a parametric manner of working, right? So using parametric enablers to create an environment in the architectural industry. Now, the reason why I emphasize that he was an engineer is because even though our BIM is most popularly related to the architectural or built industry, the ideology formalized from an engineer. Okay, so if the ideology came from an engineer, is it not applicable to civil engineering? We will answer that question later on in the presentation. So once this ideology was born and it got a lot of people thinking, it was then needed to be documented and put down onto paper. And then in 1975, the closest concept of BIM was first documented by a working prototype. This prototype was called Building Description System, and it was published in the AIA journal. That is the American Institute of Architects journal by Charles M. Eastman, fondly known as Chuck. But his documentation of BIM, of this ideology, of this methodology, earned him the title of the father of BIM, because this is where BIM actually took off. And he also touched on a lot of parametric nature in terms of design modeling. Not only that, he also added in the dimensions of analysis, as well as material quantities taking off, as well as simulation and so on. He also incorporated contractors into this life cycle. So you can see how this vision had grown from an ideology to something put down onto paper. So again, this is where the origins actually of BIM were actually born. So as you can see, BIM has been around since the 1970s, and the first BIM technologies actually developed were within the 1970s and early 1980s. So it's not a foreign concept. It has been along for quite some time. Now, the reason why it wasn't so popular or it did not boom in that time space was it was too expensive to execute. Right? Even though it was such a winning formula, It was just too expensive from a hardware perspective to run such applications. An example of this is if you look back a few years where TVs were absolutely huge, they were heavy, they were bulky, and they were expensive. And look at now how widespread and accessible it has become to the population. It's the exact same scenario BIM found itself in during that time period. So thereafter, the term building model in the sense of BIM as used today was first used in papers in the mid-1980s. So they started piecing things together and started getting it much more formalized. However, the term building information model and building information modeling, including the acronym BIM that we would normally use today and is mostly used, did not come into existence or did not become popularly used until some 10 years later. And what ushered in this acronym was in 2002, Autodesk actually released a white paper entitled Building Information Modeling, and other software vendors also started to assert their involvement in the field. So now you know how BIM, the ideology, progressed to what it is and becoming a solid state in terms of process. But what about its evolution to today? How much has it changed? So, like I had mentioned earlier, BIM has and still is predominantly championed by architects. With the ideology thought in relative to the architectural industry at first, of course, it's going to be championed by that industry. However, it has led to a big misconception that the application and implementation of BIM technologies and workflows are exclusively for the architectural industry. And today I'm going to show you that that is totally incorrect. So while BIM has its origins in architecture, it can be applied to everything that is designed and built. And you can see in bracket, I put the word constructed. What creates this confusion is the word building in the acronym BIM, where a lot of people take its literal sense as a building, but it should be understood as building in terms of an asset. So building a road, building a pipe network, building a railway, building a tunnel. It's the action rather than the actual asset. So that has always thrown a lot of civil engineers off in terms of the naming or the acronym itself. However, the application can be spread and more fruitful to civil infrastructure professionals when applied correctly. So just to reiterate, BIM is not only for the built environment, but for the civil industry as well. And it can be applied throughout the core segments in the civil infrastructure industry. As you can see there, we could use it for structures, we could use it for roads, rail, bridges, tunnels, as well as pipe networks and utilities. And because it has a parametric nature attached to it, it is very, very beneficial and intelligent in its application. So just to give you a bird's eye view as to some of the big projects throughout the world that have actually incorporated BIM in the different components of civil infrastructure. I'm going to start off here at home in South Africa, where we would look at HHO consulting engineers who used the visual nature and parametric modeling application of BIM to get their project signed off and get going. This was for a bus rapid transport system for the Ria Vaya here in Johannesburg, and it made their project that much more successful. I mean, they were met with challenges where the visualization was a major stumbling block in getting the project going ahead. And incorporating intelligent engineering or civil engineering design with a visual platform that translates it to non-technical audiences, they got the project approved. Another example is EGIS, the Cable Stayed Bridge. It is the longest or the biggest cable stayed bridge in Africa, where it looked at incorporating 3 continents, people from 3 continents. That is already a hurdle on its own. And they ran into 0 clashes during that. So again, that was in Morocco. Then we look at No Consult Rail and Tunnel project, where they really infused innovation in this project for enhancing the tunnel design for the project by including gamification. We'll touch on that a bit later. A very interesting project, which caught my attention recently, is the HDR Automated People Mover project. So this is in Los Angeles, okay? And the problem that they were facing was because of the huge influx of travelers and people in the airport, because it was so busy, they needed to find a much more efficient, reliable way of moving people. Hence the project title, Automated People Mover. So they had created a train system that was infused into the airport to allow this. Now look at the comprehensive nature of this project. Do you think by using old methods, outdated traditional methods to tackle something such innovative will actually pay off? Definitely not. You're going to be met with a whole set of new challenges. This is where BIM became so powerful. Another very popular topic in industry is the Virgin Hyperloop 1. Here with automation, visualization, rendering, BIM at the core of it, they are actually applying this to the Virgin Hyperloop. And last but not least, if you're looking at things in the water segment, there are a range of a lot of water treatment plants that have been done using BIM. This is just one of them, which was done by Accredited in Collins Park, which was a water treatment plant, and that is actually a render. Look how realistic all of these projects look. Now, if consultants, professionals are using BIM on such a large scale, I would like to question our civil industry. Why aren't we using it? It has to be successful and positive in its impact for its use in such large scale projects. And by having events and discussions like this, what we're having here today, we must increase that awareness and innovate our own civil infrastructure industry here in South Africa. So fast forward to today, BIM is now popularly adopted across the AEC industry, as well as providing a convergence workflow between manufacturing and construction. This is what I like to term plug and play or Lego construction, where manufacturing for construction allows for much more streamlined, faster service delivery and infrastructure provision. Look at the fancy estates that are coming up with all of these added advantages, technologies at your disposal. It's not just coming out of anywhere. It is the convergence workflow between construction and manufacturing. And because of BIM's innovation, its intelligent, its smarter way of working, we can overcome challenges in a much more intelligent way. And with its plethora of benefits, it has led to many countries around the world mandating its use. Because if this is a winning recipe throughout the different projects, different components that I've just shown you, why not mandate its use? Why not standardize it and drive the innovation of the industry towards this direction? And just to give you some stats, right? This was from the NBS National BIM report, just to give you some idea behind it. It involved every continent throughout the world besides Antarctica. So it is a very well-informed survey that we are seeing here. And if you look at 2011, just 13% of users, professionals, were using BIM. And look at the awareness in 2020. It has gone up to 73%. Right? More important, look at the unaware block. It has shrunk down to 1%. So it's only a matter of time where that 26% also joins the bandwagon, if I could use that term, because look at how beneficial this is. How much more resilient infrastructure is capable of being output to the public using this methodology. Let's jump in and bring in some more stats, right? So this is showing you the BIM adoption over time from 2011 going up to 2020, right? So 73% is what you've just seen in the previous slide, because I know as engineers, most of us, we like bar graphs also. So I've incorporated that. Not only that, another question was posed to the audience where it was, from your understanding of BIM, how strongly do you agree or disagree with the following statements? So let's start unpacking them one by one. So adopting BIM has increased or would increase coordination of construction projects. 85% agreed, right? And the important stat here is actually the color cyan. 76% agree, but they've not adopted it. Now that boggles my mind as to why haven't we adopted it? And you're going to see in the presentation later on as it progresses, and I hand over to Yanni, why this is the case, right? BIM has reduced or would reduce the risks of problems arising on projects, 72%. I mean, actually, I'm not going to actually read all of them, but look at 71, 66, 51. All of them are for BIM. And not only that, those that are not using it actually do agree with that point. So you can see there is a common denominator here that BIM is the way forward for enhanced resilient civil infrastructure. However, to be fair, the survey also asked the users who would like or who is for using BIM, right? And this is the stats that had populated, where 68% had said we have adopted BIM successfully, and 58%, if we don't adopt BIM, we'll get left behind. And unfortunately, this is our majority state in our South African civil engineering industry, but we should not despair because the awareness and, again, talking about it like what we're having today in a structured, conducive manner will promote the implementation and the adoption of BIM in our industry. And like I said, I am being fair. There is also a small percentage of users out there that are against using BIM, right? So, but look at how small of a minority they are, 5%, and 14 saying straight off the bat that they rather not adopt BIM. And I can tell you from our experience doing this for a long time, that is because the understanding of those users has not met the correct leverage that BIM provides. So with that, if we look at BIM for civil infrastructure, a bird's eye view, this is exactly where we are today. I'm going to talk you through this, being a technical specialist, how this actually forms the crux of good, resilient, well thought out civil infrastructure. So let's start off with reality capture, drones, UAVs, and scan. It is the fastest, automated, and of course, coolest way of actually capturing survey or terrain data. Right? You can program or link a drone to your tablet. You can program or define the flight path. You can put in control points. Surveyors will know what I'm talking about, where it will tighten up the accuracy of it. And you could actually fly path and capture the area that you want. The great thing with this is nothing is missed. You have contextual modeling on your desktop, or literally having the site in your desktop. The next benefit is the actual geospatial data, GIS, the incorporation of this live feed of data into your infrastructure or your site as a civil engineer, as a governmental organization, as an industry, provides that connectivity that you would not get from static processes. We can then generate terrain data from there, depending on the assets that had been scanned, have been captured, imported, whether it be via terrain, triangulation, extraction, that can be easily computed. A fun thing that is actually quite cool for civil infrastructure is the incorporation of machine control. Remember in our last session, we talked about Industry 4.0. This is where the bridging comes into effect, where you have a plant that can import CAD data and grade or construct an entity based on that electronic data. So for example, if you had to import a road with its associated cross sections, the machine will actually stay according to that cross section and grade your road accordingly. Now, how much more control do you want? And this is again afforded by using BIM for civil infrastructure. Another great thing is detecting problems before we hit construction. And that is where clash detection, coordination, and a minimum of 4D construction scheduling is possible. Imagine working on a huge development project, absolutely huge, with a lot of services that need to be provided, a lot of roads, a lot of accesses, maybe bridges, some tunnels, overhead services, buildings. It can get quite cluttered from a design perspective. Not only that, from a construction perspective, it also becomes quite tricky as to how you would schedule things. Now, with the advent of BIM and 4D scheduling, we can now simulate construction based on your project program. We normally use Microsoft Projects for that, or you would normally use Excel, depending on your preference. Link that to your start and finish processes, and it will automate or simulate the construction of the assets as the timeline of the project progresses. And it will actually pick up where clashes are. For example, maybe a pipe tolerance has been violated, or it's going through a wall, or this structure is clashing with this road elevation is off based on another structure or contributing infrastructure. All of that can be seen before you could even issue for construction. Now, that in itself is a game changer. And when I say minimum of construction 4D scheduling, I mean that 4D is relative to time, where you add the time aspect to a simulation. So that is 4D, 3D being the model, 4D being the schedule of time, and 5D being the actual cost that's associated to it. And it can expand depending on your application and technology. We can then move to the visualization aspect, where, like I've highlighted in HHO's case, they use visualization to convey the design intent in a non-engineering yet engineering way. Documentation can be automated and produced in a much more clearer manner, a much more detailed engineering manner. From there, we can actually get estimation. That's where costing comes in, hence 5D. And then, of course, the connection between civil design and civil structures is maintained in a dynamic nature. This is why BIM for civil infrastructure is a winner. There is no debating it. And I thought, giving you a bird's eye view from what we can do right now, all of this is possible right now, makes you question your own processes and what you are doing to provide resilient, efficient, and much more faster ways of working for your own teams, for yourself as a professional, your companies, your consultants, and your organizations. So now that you know where we are today, or what is capable today, let's look at the future of BIM and digital transformation and where it is actually heading. So I had included this snapshot here in my previous presentation, where we looked at smart cities. Of course, BIM puts you on the most efficient path to achieving that. And this is where you could manage your assets in a much more smarter way. That is only possible with the Internet of Things. So you would need a BIM model as a foundation in order to get this process up and running. The thing that I did not include, well, actually, before I get to that, let's look at the near-term and long-term effects, because we are talking future here, right? We will start off by looking at operational efficiency, because once a smart environment, a smart city has been achieved, operational efficiency now needs to be tweaked. Think of it, right? If you got something running as a prototype, if I could use that word, you would need to see where you can make it much more optimized. Once you reach a balanced or a satisfactory operational efficiency, you can then look at diversifying and looking at offering new products and services to enhance the citizens' quality of life. Based on those services, we then go long-term, where we could look at outcome economy, where we could use pay-as-you-go services, or we could actually free up new ecosystems or new services in a much more economical manner. And with all that lined up, we can then lead to the autonomous future that we are already having a preview of, where things actually are much more motorized, optimized, and autonomous. Now, coming back to gamification. Gamification, in my opinion, for a civil infrastructure professional is the hot topic. Aside or just below smart cities, it actually works hand in hand, where we take the infrastructure, make it immersive. Imagine taking your model or being a government organization, urban planning unit, developer. Imagine immersing yourself in a development, walking around it, looking at it, checking things, teleporting, AR, VR. The gaming industry is actually having a very big impact on civil infrastructure. And with that merger or that partnership forming, it's actually making for much more enhanced service delivery. And of course, it's cooler. I mean, civil engineers, we are normally thought of the guys that have the 2D type of setup, where we just go with our 2D type of drawings, sections, and so on. Now we can also immersify and also get onto this visualization aspect that is much more beneficial in our industry. So with that, we will then jump into a professional perspective. So now we've seen the benefits of BIM for us as an industry. What about for us as fellow professionals? So for a professional perspective, what are the benefits? As a professional, it will afford you more insightful design, construction, and management processes to get your projects done much more better. And by using technology as an enabler, academia and innovation form the perfect symbiosis to achieving sustainable infrastructure. Because if you have innovation fused with practicality and engineering ingenuity, you will definitely get a winning recipe. And therefore, it leads me to that point where BIM empowers the professional to be creative in terms of problem solving and solution mapping, being the best they can be on a global scale. Because now you have all of the flex power, you've got the academics, you've got the advisory of your senior peers, your industry experience, you've got the technology to actually now optioneer and troubleshoot better options in providing service delivery that are more economical, sustainable, and resilient. So it opens up avenues for further professional growth. This will be touched on a bit later when Yanni speaks about the windows of opportunities that are coming your way, and also for holistic development, as Vishal has said earlier, looking at how the youth is currently marginalized in terms of getting into the industry and becoming robust. Technology plays a good enabler in that process. Not only that, for the senior or seasoned professionals, it's also a really good way of creating a good partnership. So by providing enhanced project collaboration coordination, teams can excel to new heights. And with cloud APIs, VR, automation, and integration with various formats and data sources, it provides an open BIM environment. If you are keeping up with what's going on abroad, an open BIM environment is now being established where collaboration is much more succinct, right? And this leads to, or this has come about because leaders, industry professionals, consultants, companies have evolutionized towards a new design process where we do all of the hard work in the initial stages with much more insight, leading for a much more smoother project transition till the end. Whereas our old traditional processes, our peak pressure is in the construction phase, and that is not a good thing because your costing goes up, your scheduling goes up, your penalties, your risks, all of that are affected. Whereas here, you have much more flexibility and room to breathe before you actually hit the ground running. So let's look at our South African civil industry. What is our current state of mind? Right. So the current situation in the South African civil industry is such. We have the senior or the seasoned professionals, those that have a wealth of experience and practical knowledge by delivering a lot of projects throughout their career. And they are invaluable to our industry, right? Because with experience comes a much more broader lens of wisdom when it comes to project delivery. However, they are very limited in technology understanding. This is generally the case, all right? What I mean by that is if you were an engineer back in the day and you progress over time, you are still used to the way that you're doing it, working harder, looking at practical ways of doing it, pen and paper, trial and error. So transitioning to a much more technological era that we are currently in is a bit difficult. So that has created much more of like a rigidness in this segment or in this senior category or seasoned category, where they are much more less likely to invest change and new ways of learning. But with BIM, they will definitely need a BIM mentor as well as learning guidance. So this is one end of the seesaw. The next is a much more robust, youthful industry graduate that is coming in, right? So those that are just qualifying or fresh graduates or just started their careers, they have limited or no industry and work experience. They are what I call textbook driven. right? What you've learned, that's what you're going to apply. But as you grow as a professional, you see that sometimes needs to be tweaked, and that can only be reached with experience. However, the advantage that they have is because you are born in this technological environment and you've progressed and you've seen how it has taken step by step and gotten to where it is, they understand the processes and how to utilize this technology, right? They are more likely to embrace change and new ways of learning. However, they would also need BIM mentoring and learning. They would still need the guidance. So on one hand, on one edge of the seesaw, you have this wealth of practical experience that is most definitely needed, right? But there's no technology advocates. Here you've got the textbook graduate who is technologically savvy, but does not have the experience required, the practicality when it comes to project delivery. This creates a disconnect in our industry right now. And in order to alleviate that, we need to balance the scales so that we get a good equilibrium for our industry. So what is the result of BIM lacking, the innovation lacking in our South African civil industry? Let's look at the industry first. So lack of innovation and transformation in work process. We're still doing things the old way, the old-fashioned way. We're still sticking to it, even though we know it's costing us, whether it's economy or resilience in our infrastructure. We're still sticking with it because that's what we know. Little or no improvement in productivity and proactivity in infrastructure delivery. I think we've taken a stance where we just accept that things are the way they are, and that should definitely be changed. There are better ways, and they're not so difficult. We are definitely falling behind in digital transformation of our industry here in South Africa because of the points 1 and 2 raised above. This has resulted in often not meeting project deadlines, as well as providing infrastructure delivery, which is a critical issue here in our country. Ineffective construction and health and safety management, because if things are not thought out correctly, your management plan goes out the window. And when there's no structured process in place, safety on site becomes a detrimental issue, right? And BIM is very tightly linked to all of these points. Poorly executed projects in terms of economy, resilience, and sustainability. I think I've touched on that already, because if your processes are wrong, your technology is not being used in or wielded in the correct way, it's going to happen, unfortunately. And this results in reduced potential on an international level. When we are bidding to host things like, for example, the FIFA World Cup was like the biggest thing we hosted last. After that, because when things like this on a global scale happen and they contribute to our economy, if we do not have the infrastructure, the smart infrastructure, resilient infrastructure available, it's not going to make us recognized on an international level, and it's not going to contribute to our economy. So some insights from the same survey that I've referenced so far. These are all of the positive points that all of the users that are embracing BIM have highlighted. It has transformed the way they work. Think about how we are working right now. You will have your answer. Improve the productivity. It's exactly in correlation with what I've just said. Improve the productivity of the construction sector. Transform the whole construction industry. Improve the speed of delivery. That is a very, very critical one. Help the construction sector meet challenges of sustainability. I mean, the word is slipping my mind right now, right? But there are sustainability initiatives put into place that should be reached and endeavored towards. And not only that, as an economy, countries cited that it helped them to actually export more. All of this will contribute to a better industry and, of course, a better South Africa, a better Africa as it is adopted in our continent. So 6 hurdles to BIM innovation being a norm in the South African civil industry. Now, as I had mentioned earlier, there are people that are aware of it, they know that it works, but what's stopping them from adopting it, making it a norm in industry? First one is the most common one, resistance to change. Anything out of our comfort zone we don't really like to embrace it because we feel very overwhelmed. This is general with anything in life or in work in general, but it needs to be overcome. Not understanding the need, impact, or the benefits. So you know what it is, but you don't understand how it can benefit you or your clients or the industry as a whole, and you don't actually know how to justify the need of them in your processes. Also, there's a state of confusion or gray area where people don't know where to turn to for advice, for guidance, for implementation, right? That is a very valid point, especially for something that is still being newly implemented, even though it's been along for quite some time. Project scalability, users think that based on the work that they do, on maybe it might be of a small nature, it's not really necessary. The initial cost, learning curve, and expertise required. This is also a very valid point, but I will get to that in a bit. And the last one being no legislation mandating its application. I mean, if it's not forced down in tenders or from government itself as a requirement, why should we adopt it? These are just some of the other segments or other reasons why people have cited the main barriers of using BIM. And you can see some of them correlate to what we have here in South Africa. So how do we overcome these 6 hurdles in the civil industry? Let's tackle them one by one. Let's start off with the resistance to change. You need to embrace change. There is no other way around it. I cannot make it much more, I can't sugarcoat it if I could use that. This is as straightforward as it is. All problems need new solutions, and looking at all of the available data, the theses, the white papers, the reports, the blogs that have been done, the customer success stories, BIM has a good track record of real business benefits. So it's like getting into the gym, right? At first you will try and prolong it. However, once you get in and you see the positive impact it's having on you, you probably think, why didn't you start sooner? All right. The next one is not understanding the need, impact, or benefits. We need to do what we are doing today. Attend industry events and webinars by reputable industry leaders, thought leaders, and people that are experts in this space. So you need to keep abreast of industry trends and breakthroughs. The next one, not knowing who to turn to for advice, guidance, and implementation. This is where it is very critical that you partner with Bim and technology experts. You need to consult with them. You need to talk to them so that they make you understand what's happening. They educate you and they provide their consulting expertise so that them as industry leaders can get you up to space, right? Just as you had to go study to become a civil engineer, to become a draftsperson, to whichever field you're in, you had to put in the time in understanding what you're doing. And that's where Bim technology experts, consultants are a pivotal role in this process. Project scalability, I put it as simple focus on the big picture, applying Bim processes and technologies now to land bigger projects in the future. So if you streamline your processes now, you become much more efficient, you deliver much more faster, you get greater capacity. The quality of your work, your workmanship goes up. And based on the teams that you have and shaping that ideology, that methodology, you can now take on bigger projects. So even though you might be working in a smaller project or in a small environment where you're just starting off, you're doing a few projects here and there, starting a good grounding now pays off looking at the big picture when you want to land that big project. Initial cost, learning curve, and expertise required. Again, you need to partner with Bim and technology experts. They will help you to become BIM ready. They will be able to upskill you, your people, your organization, your processes, and make you that much more competitive as a professional as well as an organization. When it comes to no legislation mandating its application yet in South Africa, we all say here that be proactive rather than reactive. Bim adoption is increasing. You can see the magnitude of projects that it has been applied on, and mandates across the world are also increasing. So it is here to stay, and that is exactly what's going to happen. There's no escaping this. Sooner or later, it is going to be mandated. So now that we talked about the industry, let's look at the hurdles for the professional themselves, right? So the first three are exactly the same as being in industry, which is quite interesting. Resistance to change, not knowing who to talk to for guidance, and of course the legislation. That is a very underlying very underlining key comments or pointers. But the fourth one is the absence or lack of them in university curriculums, right? That is also a compounding effect, because if it's not thought of at the grassroots level, being adopted or caught on later in a professional's career, it's quite tough, or it's seen as that. Access to BIM technologies for students and educators. So for those young professionals that are coming up, they know what's going on in industry, they're keeping their eyes out, they're looking at the technologies. Like I said, they're more drawn to technology, but they don't know where to turn to in terms to access the actual technologies that are available. And of course, the main one being finding it just too daunting to upskill. You find this is a huge mountain in front of you, and you just don't know what to do, and you become overwhelmed, you become paralyzed, and you just abandon it altogether. Now, how do we overcome this as civil professionals, right? So we talked about industry. This is for the professional, the individual themselves. So resistance to change, not knowing who to turn to, and the legislation have the same takeaway points, right? You need to embrace change. You need to partner with the Bim and technology experts, consultants, and be proactive rather than reactive. And as you can see on the left-hand side, I have put in the group that will most likely be impacted by this. So seasoned professionals don't really want to change the way they do things because they've been doing it like this for 30 years and so on, right? It is a hard thing to grasp, and it can come across like that, but that mindset just needs to be shifted a tad bit and just take it as you're going. Right. The next one is for both parties, whether you are a fresh grad or you are a seasoned professional, you both need guidance, whichever spectrum you fall in. Same with the third one. Let's look at the fourth one, the absence of or lack of BIM in university curriculums. We need to create awareness. Right? If we as an industry start stirring up conversations, again, like we are doing today, like we're doing online, like those that are doing masters or they're doing reports, writing, blogging, educating you as an industry, once that movement or that shift in change, that requirement is realized, we can start creating a conversation and pushing towards standardizing the incorporation in curriculum soon. But without the need for it and seeing the value of it, that is not going to happen. There are some industries or some institutions that are already going into this direction, which is quite fantastic, but we need to speed that up. When it comes to access to BIM technologies for students, all you got to do is simply query or just ask. Most BIM technology providers, like for example, Autodesk, they've actually offer or provide free educational licenses to educational institutions and educators. You simply just got to register online. If you just Google educational software, it's there. So whichever provider or BIM you want to go with, it's simply just to query. As an institution, if you are a head of department, query for your students, check what's available out there because it is freely and readily accessible for this environment. And the last one being finding it too daunting, you got to take it one step at a time. None of us here today were born into the lap of BIM, right? We didn't just wake up and we knew it. We all progressed on it. And the thing was, we saw the value in it, we saw the vision in it, we accepted it, and then we started the journey. So anything new and is out of your comfort zone is daunting, but it does take a mind shift. And understanding the importance of that change is the critical factor in pursuing it. All right. So from our understanding, our current situation actually equals opportunity, even though what you've heard here is quite a bit debatable, or it could be a bit dampening. It is actually quite a cool situation because we've got a wealth of expertise and practical knowledge on one hand. we've got the technological savvy graduate on the other hand. And we need to find a way to find a common ground and create partnerships between the two. Because by using practicality and innovation, that being BIM technology innovation, using it as an enabler, smarter ways of working, we can then create a much more synchronized pattern in our industry between these two, creating an efficient balance, which then equals to having an academic and futuristic industry as the South African civil engineering industry. And this can be achieved 100%. We just, as both ends of the spectrum, need to come together, understand that common vision, and strive towards this perfect symbiosis. And with that, I will hand you over to Yani. Yani is the Director of Professional Services here at Baker Baynes. She has headed up a lot of projects in this space and is much more in touch with the actual people component, heading a lot of projects here in Africa, being in this environment, I think, forever, Yani, and has a wealth of experience that she's going to actually talk to us about today. So Yani, over to you.
Thanks, Shoaib. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Apologies for the messy desktop, everyone. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for handing over to me, Shoaib. My section of today will all be about Bim Skills Competency and how that then relates to the civil engineering expertise, and really how technology and BIM actually opens up quite a lot of new opportunities from an employment and career path point of view. So just to reiterate a little bit on what we've spoken about today so far, and we've kind of looked at two different groups of individuals, like Shoaib had mentioned. You have the newer graduate, the youth, like Vishal had mentioned earlier, and then also your older, more seasoned professionals. And in most cases, both these groups have a fairly low digital and BIM experience level. And on the other side, you have this massive digitization and move to building information modeling. And it's all about how do we actually cross the bridge between these two. While Shoaib was talking, I've been looking at some of the questions in the question box, and something that comes up quite often is when you start introducing technology in education, you need to keep in mind that individuals still actually need to know and understand their profession first before they can start learning and exploring technology. So it is very important to see you need to have the civil engineering expertise, but also then add the BIM skills to that. So to kick us off, and Shoaib had mentioned this same report earlier when he looked at the business benefits for BIM in terms of infrastructure. It's a Dodge Analytics and Deloitte report. In this report, and this was actually done in 2017, they looked at the top 7 factors that has the greatest positive impact on BIM benefits, specific for the transportation industry. So the report that you're saying has got nothing to do with the architects and the built environment. And actually the thing that came out as ranked the highest was more internal staff with BIM skills. I see my poll is popping up slightly early, but that's perfectly fine. In terms of my poll, I hope that all the attendees can also actually see my poll. And before I continue, I'd like to just give a moment to allow everyone to complete the poll. And the poll is really around how many years of experience do you have in using BIM technology and processes on projects. And Tabiling, I just want to confirm on your side if you can see any of the responses coming in.
Not as yet, Yani. Let's just give it a few moments and then we'll see shortly.
This is just for me to also understand the audience a little bit better. Should be a fairly straightforward answer. You don't have to think about it too much. Wonderful. While I allow the rest of the participants to answer that poll, I think I will, just in the interest of time, continue talking in the background. So like I had mentioned, internal staff with BIM skills is actually one of the biggest areas that can positively impact BIM benefits. And then something else that also actually made it to the top 5 is readily available BIM training, which is something that I will touch on a little bit later in my section today. Then looking at that same report, I just want to see if that, where are we on the poll? Great, there you go. Okay, so 66% have not implemented BIM, about 14% have less than 6 months, and they've just only recently started their BIM journey. I see we've got a couple of more than 5 years, and then some kind of in between with 1 year and 2 to 5 years. So thank you everyone for answering that. Just on that, to everyone who said more than 5 years, something that I found quite interesting from the same report is that asked individuals to go and kind of answered how experienced they are. And in this case, they actually take more than 5 years as a high experience level. Now, if you had to look at this in terms of civil engineering experience, I would probably say that someone with 5 years of experience isn't necessarily at a very high experience level. But because in the world of BIM, because BIM is so new and because technology is advancing so quickly, if you have 5 years of experience in using BIM applications or BIM workflows, you're actually considered a high experience level. So specifically talking to the younger generation and to the youth, you know, when you start looking for job opportunities, you always get all of these job postings that say, oh, you need a minimum of 10 years experience, or you need a minimum of 5 years experience. And in this case, if you have 5 years of experience in BIM, you are effectively a seasoned professional, which I found very interesting. Poll question has been done. Great. Now to continue on to that, and when Michelle spoke about youth and the way that technology and how the world is digitizing is actually opening up new roles and career paths. And I'm a very good example of that, because when I had finished my studies at the University of Johannesburg, I ended up in a role that was not my original intention, and mostly because I had trouble finding employment at that time, and I ended up in a technology-based role. Hence why I'm here today. So I am proof that, you know, technology and these new career paths can actually help with unemployment. So just to give you a couple, and some of these you might have heard in the industry, some of the new roles that have emerged as people are starting to adopt building information modeling. So firstly, your BIM technician or your BIM modeler. Now this is more at an operational level. Then in often cases, you might also see that some people are now referring to themselves as BIM engineers, also at an operational level. Now, just to note, this is not necessarily the hierarchical growth that you can expect, but it does just give you an idea of different kind of careers and roles that are starting to emerge. Also, we see the BIM coordinator. BIM coordinator is more at a tactical level, your BIM manager from a strategic level, more in a managerial role. And then also something that to me is quite fascinating is the concept of being a digital lead or a digitization lead. And this is a role that's not only emerging in the built environment and in some of the larger civil engineering consultants, but it's something that you're seeing in multiple different areas. There are individuals working in banking, in finance, in marketing, in all kinds of different fields that now have this role of being in a digital space. So it is quite difficult for me to give you an idea of what that role entails, because that role exists in so many different industries. And then, you know, ultimately, through this career path, you could end up at a chief technology officer or C-level. So like Shahab had mentioned, BIM isn't just for the building environment, it is very much for the civil environment as well, but we know that the building environment has adopted it more and also adopted it before. They're a little bit more mature in their BIM adoption. So I thought this would be interesting to have a look at, just in terms of where these roles came from. So this is actually from the University, Autodesk University, the Modern Bim Manager in 2018. And they had asked a group of BIM managers, what role did you originate from? So how did your career path move onto now ultimately being a BIM manager? And you can see that almost about 50% of that specific group that are now BIM managers came from being an architect. There was about 25% that actually came from being a technician or a technologist role, just under 20% from an engineering role, and then a couple from other. So if any of you on the call today, engineer, technologist, young graduate, know that looking at what happened in the built environment, that becoming a BIM manager is very much something that can be in your future. Then also, to build onto that, we must understand that once you become a BIM manager, or once you move into any of these BIM related roles, that the way that role, the responsibilities work will be slightly different than what you might imagine. So they had asked the same participants, on average, how do you split your time? Whenever I start talking about BIM managers, a lot of people and organizations say to me, we can't afford a BIM manager. How can you expect, a sole position to be created just for this? And oftentimes in organizations, there's no one person who only deals with specific BIM elements. Most of them also play a very big part in actually doing project work. And as you can see from this, that 44% actually said that 44% of their time is actually still spent on project support. So doing project work that you would have done anyway if you were, for example, in an engineering role. Then about 38% is all around maintaining and developing BIM, BIM standards, BIM protocols, BIM content, and then about 20% in the research and development space. Now, to move on to that, I'm going to be focusing quite a lot on the individuals today. And I wanted to talk about individual BIM competency, or IBC, a nice new acronym for you, because in the BIM world, we love our acronyms. And common problems that we see for organizations who want to go down the route of actually starting to offer BIM services and starting to embrace the methodology is, it's always, how do we assess the abilities of our staff? Also, how do we then improve their performance and actually develop them to become BIM competent? And how do we recruit new competent individuals? What do we ask for? How do we write that new job spec? And just for clarity, when I'm referring to competency in my following slides, we're talking about the individual's combined knowledge, skill, experience, and in some cases, and in fact, in most cases, also their attitudes and personality traits. It's very important to consider that, because you might be excellent at understanding technology and really grasping the IT side of things, but you may not be a good BIM trainer or a BIM coach, or you may be a brilliant BIM manager and you're really great at documenting and capturing protocols, but you struggle to effectively lead a BIM coordination meeting. So there are these personality traits that you need to keep in mind, both from an organizational point of view and if you're an individual that wants to go down a BIM-based career path. If you are not a fan of research and development, there's certain BIM roles that's maybe not ideal for you. Now, talking about BIM competencies, what BIM competencies are there and how do we map them? So this is from BIM ThinkSpace. It was published in 2012, so actually quite a while ago. And they have 9 main BIM competencies. So there's your managerial, administrative, functional, operational, technical, implementation, research and development, like I've mentioned, supportive, and then core. And this is all built into a very nice matrix that I'm going to break down. And within each one of these, if you are either an individual or within your organization, you can look at your staff or yourself and use something like this to actually rate your own competency. So scale 1 to 4, or we'll actually scale 0 to 4, 0 being none and then 4 being expert. And remember to always consider both the conceptual knowledge and also then the applied knowledge and skill. There are a lot of people who really have a conceptual knowledge and understanding of BIM, but haven't necessarily actually applied it on a project. And these two things are vastly different. So there's a scale that you can use if you want to start mapping BIM competencies. But to jump into these a little bit more, I'm going to start off with your managerial competency. So in terms of BIM managerial competency, it's very much the same as any other type of managerial competencies. It's all about decision-making abilities and then really having a look at long-term strategies and initiatives. So we're talking about leadership, strategic planning, organizational management, etc. In the context of BIM, to give you an example, this would be the ability to understand business benefits and business risks of model-based workflows. Now, if I'm saying model-based workflows, I'm referring to BIM-based workflows. And if we have a look at our administrative competencies, you know, your normal kind of organizational activities that you need to do in order to maintain those strategic objectives that was created at a management level. So a lot of this might include bidding, procurement, a lot of your contractual elements, and then also a big portion of this is HR and recruiting. Again, to look at a BIM example, so this would be the ability to identify BIM knowledge and BIM skill requirements for large collaborative projects. And depending on the project or depending on the area within civil engineering that you find yourself in, these might vary. Then your functional competencies. And if we talk functional competencies, when Shahab and I look at the young graduate versus the seasoned professional, this is the functional competencies that the seasoned professionals, you know, really tick the box. It's your non-technical overall abilities to understand how projects are delivered and managed, to understand collaboration and project management. And an example of this might be the ability to facilitate a multidisciplinary BIM meeting. If anyone's ever been in a BIM meeting or in any kind of coordination meeting, specifically if you have architects involved, you know that those meetings can be quite challenging and you need to know how to navigate that. Then from an operational point of view, again, hands-on efforts that again is required to deliver a project or a specific aspect of a project. So here we're talking about design, simulation, estimation, and so forth. An example here would be the ability to use models to generate bill of quantities. Now, from an operational point of view, this is not a technical competency, but you need to know how to use the technical output of BIM in order to tick all of those operational boxes. Then the technical competencies. And what's quite interesting about this is that typically we find that the youth and the younger generation are usually more inclined to have better technical competencies, and they tend to grasp it a little bit quicker, specifically in the digital age. It's easier for younger individuals to really understand how technology operates and things. So it's all about delivering your deliverables across the different disciplines or specialities. So we're talking modeling, drafting, model management. Again, an example here would be the ability to actually use the BIM software tools to generate an accurate and error-free model. And moving on to implementation competencies. This is an area where we often find that individuals tend to outsource this to BIM consultants or to other parties to actually lend them support. And this is all about introducing BIM concepts and tools into the organization, but then also to develop those, to develop your BIM component library, your BIM management, and your standardization. And if you are new to moving into BIM, this is the type of thing that helps if someone sets it off once or for you in the beginning, because it saves you quite a bit of time. Example here again, developing protocols specific to generating and maintaining a model component library. I know that there was something related to this in the question box earlier as well. Then your supportive competencies. This is the people online who are a little bit IT inclined. This is probably where you will have a higher rating. And this is all around file and network management, hardware selection, deployment, software troubleshooting, Some people tend to look towards their IT department for this. And again, some people tend to outsource this. But as an individual, if you can, tick this box as a competency, you should be able to set yourself apart from just the other graduate that you are up against in an interview process. So here, ability to help others with troubleshooting for the software and hardware issues and so forth. Then research and development. It's one of the areas that I quite like a lot, and I'd like to think that I rank highly in terms of this competency, but really it's around the ability to evaluate existing processes and then investigate new solutions, but not just investigate those new solutions, actually facilitate the adoption of that within either an organization or within the large industry. So a lot of this might include things like teaching and coaching and change facilitation. Again, an example, the ability to monitor and select and recommend a technology solution that may enhance the deliverables of an organization. Now, just to give yourself an idea to tie into Vishal and what you as younger individuals or seasoned professionals can do to really set yourself apart. I've started off by looking at your younger graduates and the types of competencies that you might want to work on to really, like I mentioned, set yourself apart and add a couple of extra things on your CV that the other graduates that's also interviewing for a position that you might not have. So obviously here, the technical competency kind of rates the highest, but also having a little bit of an IT understanding is very beneficial. From an operational point of view, you need to not only understand how to create a model and how to do the drafting, but also understand how you can actually get information from your model-based workflow to ultimately tick the boxes and the operational requirements. To get a sense of how the implementation works and really understand how you can create BIM libraries and so forth is also very important. And then from a functional point of view, this is actually understanding the industry that you're in is obviously very important. So if we had to look at that matrix, I've kind of highlighted the main competencies for the younger individuals to focus on. And if we're looking at our more seasoned professionals, I do understand that there's probably a group in between these, but if we had to look at all the individual groups, we would have been here until 9 o'clock. For your more seasoned professionals, again, most of you would probably find it very easy to build your BIM managerial competency because it's so similar to just management in general, but also from an administrative point of view, you shouldn't get an idea of what kind of skills and resources are required. It is useful to have a little bit of a core understanding of some of the things that your support staff and your technical staff would be doing. That operational competency of knowing what you can get out of that information model is very important. Oftentimes, from a strategic point of view, research and development is something that everyone can work on. And then, like I mentioned, functional or basically understanding your industry and your profession is probably one of those boxes where most of you online will score a 4 out of 4. And in both cases for these, information management is key. It's actually not a separate competency based on this specific matrix, but understanding digital information management is extremely important, and it's something that all individuals need to know. So just to highlight in yellow on that side, kind of the boxes on that matrix that might be really beneficial for the more seasoned professionals or those with a little bit more industry experience. Then I just wanted to delve a little bit deeper into some of these new roles and career paths, the BIM technician or the BIM modeler. So this would traditionally be more kind of your drafts person. So if you're more from a drafting point of view, this is a very natural career growth that you might find yourself in. And in this case, the responsibilities is all around creating that model for a specific discipline, making sure that the model and the information within the model aligns to the standards that set out in the BIM execution plan. You'll also need to be able to know that how you can coordinate and collaborate both with your internal team and with external consultants, creating that BIM specific modeling content, obviously construction drawings, and getting all of those outputs from your BIM model would still be a big part of it. And then coordinating the design and documentation and the methodology of how you use those BIM software tools. So if this sounds like something that you might be interested in, or if this might sound like a role that you need to add to your staff, the skills and competencies here would really be, you need to be a software and modeling expert. You really need to understand content and template creation. Obviously, you need to know a fair amount of drafting, and hardware and IT knowledge is also really beneficial. So from a competency, if we look back at those 9 competencies that I've mentioned, your technical, supportive, and implementation would be key. Then up next is your BIM coordinator. So the BIM coordinator often prepares BIM execution plans and project-specific training documentation. They're also proficient in the BIM authoring tools, and they provide technical support to your BIM modelers or to your BIM technicians. More often than not, they play a big part in managing and maintaining a lot of the project content and getting additional content to build that BIM library. A big part of this is you need to really understand and ensure that the changes in the procedures and the standards from a BIM point of view is effectively communicated and documented so that everyone else understands it. This is something that we see more actually from a building space, because they have a little bit more complicated coordination on some projects, is that creating that original base model and coordination between disciplines is often something that the BIM coordinator would do, and then just the daily model management. So again, software and modeling expert, understanding of content creation, but here also BIM standards and guidelines, and then also BIM-based coordination and collaboration. From a competency point of view, technical, supportive implementation, like I've mentioned, but you definitely need a great functional understanding. You cannot put someone in a BIM coordinator role who doesn't actually understand civil engineering. Again, needs to understand the operational side of things and how BIM can be used to meet operational requirements, and then just overall have a couple of the core competencies. And then the last one I want to just explain to you in a little bit more detail is the BIM Manager. So the BIM Manager, not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, are also responsible for managing the software licenses and the implementation and the supporting software. Sometimes you tend to move that over to an IT side, but there's always this, we can talk about bridging another gap between the BIM space and IT. BIM Manager also plays a big part in making sure that organizations are informed about best practices. They're responsible for BIM standards, implementation and enforcement of those standards. So they're really the BIM evangelist or the BIM hero in your organization. Oftentimes, BIM managers also provide BIM training internally, and then transferring the knowledge and the understanding that they have to the rest of the support staff, or actually to the rest of the organization. Like I've mentioned before, you need to understand implementation. You need to understand BIM standards and guidelines. But in the case of a BIM manager, change management and process optimization are 2 big areas that will really set you apart from other BIM managers. Implementation competency, functional competency, again, you need to understand the industry and the environment and the projects that you're working in. But it also then obviously have a managerial component. You need to be able to strategize and be able to see how these benefits will actually implement the organization. What risks are there that you need to mitigate? Research and development is a very big component of a BIM manager role, and then also some administrative tasks. Now, to just give you an idea, and this is from Grimshaw, it's a UK-based consulting firm. They have quite a big team of BIM managers and BIM coordinators, and they've kind of grouped all of their staff into these are the buckets that you need to be really good at. So this individual that you see in front of you, I've left his name off for the purposes of today, but his previous role was an engineer. And most of, well, half of his time is really spent on maintaining and developing BIM implementation. About a quarter of his time is project support, so actual project work, and then about a quarter of his time is around research and development. And this is actually a BIM manager. Then if we have a look at a BIM coordinator, and this is slightly different, because in this case, this BIM coordinator almost has a dual role. You can see that the bulk of her time is actually spent working on projects. In this case, she's actually an architect, so the bulk of her role is doing day-to-day architectural work on both a rail and an aviation project. But then a big part of her role is also training, strategy, and development for the rest of the team. So that just gives you an idea that if you were recruiting, or if you're not sure, how do you kind of shuffle roles and responsibilities in your team, or how do you then look at a staff development, this is a way that you can approach it. Then, in my opinion, no BIM session will be complete if we don't talk about information management. And information management is really redefining project management and project delivery. Now, when Shahab spoke earlier about the fact that building information modeling, probably one of the architects that coined the term just came up with building because it's something that they like, but actually it has very little to do with building. BIM has everything to do with information management. A lot of people are now starting to actually call it asset information management, but it is all about information management. What is information management, you might ask? It is, how do you get the right information to the right people at the right time? And in the right format, actually. But if you tick those boxes, this is at the core what information management is about. And again, to some of the questions were slightly related to that. I'd like to share a quote with you from Opram Academy that they got from a project. So, and this is related to information management. Everybody knew that it was important to manage information on a project, and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. But at the end, nobody did. So, of course, somebody got angry about that because it was everyone's job and everyone thought that anyone could do it, but nobody realized that everyone wouldn't do it. So how did this end up? It ended up that everybody blamed somebody and nobody did what everybody should have. If that sounds familiar, usually on a project, specifically when we start looking at BIM and Revit models and this and things being published on the cloud, this is usually how it goes. Kind of everyone thinks that someone will do it and then no one does it at the end of the day. And that is why information management is absolutely key to making sure that BIM adoption and BIM implementation on the project works. Now, just to tie into some of the roles and responsibilities and competencies that I've spoken about earlier, the project information management, it is a function. So project information management doesn't necessarily correlate to a job title. On some projects, not in South Africa, I've seen someone with the actual role of I'm a project information manager, but in most cases, it is really just a new skill or function that's added to an existing role. So on this project, I am the civil engineer, and on behalf of C Civils, I'm also doing the project information management. So a lot of you might be familiar with the concept of a document controller, similar, but a little bit more complex than that. And in terms of project information management, who should be really, really concerned with this? Other than the quote that I've shown before, we understand that actually it is everyone's responsibility, but if you are going down the path of becoming a BIM coordinator, a BIM manager, or any kind of BIM or digital lead, you really need to get to grips and master the art of project information management. To just give you an idea, and this report was actually done in 2018, they looked at information and how information was used. So done in 2018, and they had predicted what it would be in 2 years. So in 2018, 70% of people, this excludes South Africa, unfortunately, were using online meetings, and they predicted that it would be 85% in 2020. They didn't predict what else would happen in 2020, because I know that 85% is probably much higher. Something interesting here is that there was a 56% use in cloud storage services, with a prediction of that moving to 81%. And I definitely agree with that, because we've seen that on South African projects, government projects too. There was actually a little bit of a prediction in a decline in FTP sites. This is something that we can also test to. We've seen that. And then quite obvious decline in handwritten documents and notes. But to add to that, just to illustrate why information management is so important, they asked all of the respondents, and they had given a long list of different areas, and then to rank them 1, 2, and 3. And the thing that came out highest was improved team member collaboration. Better information management means better team member collaboration. A reduced reliance on paper documents, not just for the consultants, for the contractors too, because we know they tend to be very reliant on all of the printouts. Something that stood out to me was the reduced unanticipated problems, as well as accelerated project completion. And that's just managing information better. That's not necessarily adding new information and adding new technologies and, completely changing everything. It's just improving the way that information is managed. Now, with that being said, because I know I have a tendency to talk too much, I want to jump onto the last bit, which is about BIM education and upskilling. I've spoken about all of these competencies and, where do you get them? Where do you start with your BIM journey? There's a couple of things that we recommend you consider. Whether you are an individual or whether you are an organization, we recommend that you start with understanding the purpose and the desired outcomes you require. The reason why I would go and do some BIM learning might be different to why Shoaib would do it. Shoaib might have a different application and a different purpose for upskilling. Same thing applies to the individuals that we have on this webinar today. Key important thing, you need to know your current state, your change readiness, your individual proficiency or your staff's individual proficiency, and then your organizational BIM maturity. You cannot say that we need to go to B if you don't know what your A is. You need to know where you start in order to really know where you want to go. Then any kind of BIM upskilling, education, training, consulting, whatever it might be, really need to focus on people, process, and technology. We have seen many BIM implementations fail because people thought they could buy a bunch of civil 3Ds and send their people on a 4-day course. You forget about the process change. You forget about a couple of other elements that really make BIM work. Then, and it is worth mentioning that to improve competency levels in those 9 areas, to improve the technical competency, which is one of 9, yes, you can go on a software course or whichever technology course you prefer. But if you want to improve your competency in research and development, in implementation, in operational, consulting may be required because not everything can be taught in a traditional classroom environment. Then just to focus a little bit more on organizations, if you are considering your BIM journey, you need to focus on developing and implementing a digital strategy. BIM is more than just getting some 3D software and creating pretty pictures of BTR systems. It is all about a digital strategy. BIM implementation should go far beyond the CAD environment. It isn't, and it shouldn't be something that you move over to IT and say, get me a couple of licenses and make sure my people are trained on. It goes far beyond the CAD environment. The aim for any kind of BIM implementation or journey should be to optimize business processes and workflows. If you are going down this journey just because you want to be new and trendy, I would recommend that you make sure that you are optimizing business processes. Also something, and this is what I'm a firm believer of this, is you need to start with making the most of the technology that you have access to. You don't always need all the new shiny bells and whistles to start your BIM journey. To develop into your BIM journey and to the BIM utopia you might have, but to start your BIM journey, you don't necessarily need all the new fancy bells and whistles. And you need to focus on solving problems and addressing organizational issues. So in terms of BIM education, and this is something that I feel very passionate about because it's a very unregulated thing. There's no way of saying whether BIM education or a BIM course or a BIM training is really good or not. So here's some of my recommendations. Look at the country of origin. To give you an example, some of you on this call might be familiar with LOD. LOD is something that we often see in BIM execution plans and that we often see kind of an acronym being thrown around in the BIM world. The Americans and the Brits have two completely different definitions of what LOD is. And that's why I'm making sure that the country of origin, if you're doing American-based BIM training, if you found something online and it's American-based, know that their terms and the way that they do it might be different. Accreditation and certification. And the reason why I say accreditation and certification, from a civil engineering point of view, I understand that your degree and your certificates are extremely important. When it comes to the BIM world, any person can create a certificate online and say, look at my BIM course, you'll get a certificate that they've slapped together in PowerPoint. It doesn't necessarily carry as much value as you might think. Therefore, it's also important to look at accreditations. Is this just someone out of their garage starting to do some BIM training, or are they accredited and do they have some experience to actually be teaching you? Does it follow ISO 19650 guidelines? Now, I'm going to touch a little bit more on ISO 19650, but ISO 19650 is commonly known as the international BIM standard. It is actually not so much a BIM standard as it is an information management standard. But if you are doing any kind of BIM education or looking for training or upskilling, I would recommend to check that it actually follows ISO 19650 guidelines. Again, what level of BIM experience and competency is the training aimed at? If you are a new graduate, the type of BIM training that you might look at versus the type of BIM training that someone who falls into Shahab and my age bracket versus the type of training that a 55-year-old might look at will be different, because they will need different competencies in order to effectively perform within their role in their organization. Does the provider have both knowledge and practical skill, industry experience? And the reason why I add that there is anyone can learn AutoCAD and then teach AutoCAD. It doesn't mean that they've ever used AutoCAD on a project. And that is something important to remember, that there's a difference between someone who knows where to click and pick to create something in the software versus who knows what it's actually like when you need to do that on a project. Again, what are the outcomes that you require? And BIM is not unfortunately, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Each person and each individual's and organization's BIM journey will start off at a different starting point. So oftentimes, look for something and look for content that can be customized to suit your individual or your organizational needs, or sometimes even your project needs. Again, does the training cover multiple areas of BIM competency, like I've mentioned before? And does the provider offer blended learning? The reason why this is important, the way that the 23-year-old fresh new graduate consumes content and learns is very different to the way that the almost retired engineer will learn. And looking at blended learning, one big thing that I always get when people talk about, oh, I need to do all of this training, is that there's this issue of downtime. In terms of a blended learning approach, you tend to narrow your downtime because you can't just take 2-3 weeks or months off actually producing work to now go on a bunch of BIM courses. Then I just want to tie into what Shahab had said earlier, educators and students, and I've also seen some of that popping up in the question box. If you are an educator or a student, some other technology vendors may also, but I know that Autodesk provides free access to software for students and educators. They also have a free design academy where you can either get teaching resources or, if you're a student, take a course. Then in terms of product certifications, now I'm specifically talking about that technical competency. There are some certifications in the infrastructure design environment that you can go and do to basically prove that you are technically competent in a specific piece of technology. And I've mentioned ISO 19650, and it's often something that pops up and people ask me, where can I read more about it? My recommendation for this, not sponsored by them at all, is the UK BIM Alliance. They have great information on ISO 19650 and BIM standards. And the reason why we probably suggest the UK is in South Africa and in Africa, we kind of tend to follow what the UK does much more than what the Americans are doing. So great resource to go and have a look at. And then also Opram Academy The reason why we probably suggest Operam Academy, again, not sponsored, is because one of the authors of the ISO standard is actually also the author of the learning content. And before I hand back over to Shuhaib, I'd like to leave you with actually one of Paul Shawcock's quotes is, in terms of BIM, don't stress about it. Don't stress about the adoption of it, just learn to manage it. Thanks everyone. Shuhaib, over to you.
Thank you very much, Yanni, for that wealth of information, very well put and extremely clearly and concise content for the individuals. Let me share my screen again, and then we can conclude today's session. Okay. So what you've heard today from the CEO of SAICE, as well as myself and Yanni, it should give you the tools to actually bridge this gap today. I think we have covered this quite comprehensively, where we looked at the engineering aspect as a civil industry as a whole. We brought that down to an organizational level. We then furthered that down to a team or individual level, right? And we gave you all of the barriers as well as the solutions to overcome those hurdles or barriers in order to bridge this gap and create that perfect symbiosis that we have seen. As you can see, when Yanni explained so insightfully the opportunities given for individuals in the space, for these professionals that are part of our industry to take it to the next level, you can see the open opportunities or the windows of opportunities are quite vast. And today we're going to leave you with some takeaways, but we're going to start off by saying BIM is most definitely the foundation for digital transformation in our South African civil industry. It goes across all of those segments, as you're seeing on your screen, from plan to operate in a streamlined, transparent manner. And we've also included the sub-segments because in engineering, we have these various phases. Some of them have left out because we have quite a bit depending on the nature of the project. But it can transition quite seamlessly between plan, design, build, and operate. And of course, with that being the foundationary step, we can then go to digital twinning. Another thing to reiterate, BIM is here to stay. This is a better snapshot of what we were trying to edge at when it comes to BIM mandates and open BIM standards. You can see the global shift around the world, right? How things are taking off. And it's only a matter of time that the African continent or South Africa join this because of the plethora of benefits that it brings to not only the organization, not only to the country, but also to the professionals themselves. So just to recap as an industry, the 6 takeaways of today. So when it comes to resistance of change, be it on an individual level, organizational level, or as an industry, we need to embrace that change, right? You've seen the windows of opportunities that have now opened, how the roles or the tables have turned based on the circumstances that we are in. When it comes to population growth, service delivery, supply and demand, all those type of factors that filter to the civil infrastructure industry, we need to change our processes, our methodologies, our mindsets, our perspectives in order to fulfill this in the best way possible. And BIM is that way because, like we say, it has a proven track record. When it comes to not understanding the need, impact, or benefits, I hope today really opened your eyes to see the impact, the benefits, the opportunities that this brings on the industry on a holistic level. Right? And by attending industry events like these, by webinars, upskilling yourself, keeping abreast what's going on there globally, like Yanni has mentioned, UK is actually leading this charge. Right? So if you had to keep your eye out on what's happening on the UK, the developments and information management being at the heart of this, you will see breakthroughs and understanding increasing, and it will motivate you to actually adopt this much more vigorously. When it comes to not knowing who to turn to, Partner with Bim and Technology Experts, right? You've got industry experts here in South Africa, on the African continent. I mean, you've met Yanni and I now, right? We've got a lot of technology experts that, like we have said, there's a difference between knowing how to use the technology, how to apply it to your processes, versus someone that knows how to implement it on a project, how it works in a real life scenario, and the practicality behind it. It is a huge shift. It's like at campus where you have someone that is extremely intelligent but does not know how to get the point across. And you have another mix where there's someone that might not be as intelligent or could be as intelligent, but the manner that they convey their knowledge is much more insightful compared to that technical person. So there's different perspectives when you need to keep in mind when looking at this advice, and turn to reputable industry leaders. When it comes to scalability, again, as an industry, as an organization, as a consultancy, as a consultant, as a professional yourself, you need to focus on the big picture. Look at where we are going. We've shown you what the future looks like, what is current, what's our future, what was the origin. We gave you a full time loop, if I could give you that description. We need to focus on where we're going. And by applying these BIM processes and technologies now, we are going to land bigger projects in the future. We are going to take bigger leaps as an industry, as professionals. So very, very critical. Of course, anything, you do need an initial cost, learning curve, expertise required. Again, you've got people that are here readily available to help you. Not only that, if you're looking at costing from an economical point of view, again, focusing on the big picture comes into play here, because your upfront cost might look a bit steep right now, but by increasing the efficiency of your processes, your people, your technology, it frees up your capacity to land bigger projects. So it pays off itself. We dealt with many professionals that have incorporated this recently, and the costs have been covered within the first project. That's because of the streamlined effect that has on our processes as civil engineers. And last but not least, even though there may not be a legislation yet, keyword is yet, in South Africa, we still need to be prepared. Again, we do follow kind of the UK standards or the UK implementation path in terms of adoption, especially when it comes to technology, information management. It is going to filter down to us sooner or later. So instead of getting ready, we need to be ready as South Africa, as well as a country on the African continent. And we need to lead this charge in being those excelled professionals in this space. And last, definitely not least, our current situation equals opportunity. It is not all doom and gloom as it might sound. And again, referring to Yanni's portion, you can see the innovation, the futurism, the opportunities that are available for us. And I think with the wealth of knowledge being from the seasoned professional, the enthusiasm and technological savvy graduate or fresh grad, that is the perfect symbiosis for academic and a futuristic South African civil engineering industry. So again, we solve our customers' problems through digital transformation, and that is exactly what we are doing here today. Of course, we can help you in various ways. You can reach us, myself, Yanni, we are on LinkedIn. You can look at a lot of resources online, be it on YouTube, be it on the UK Bim Alliance website. And of course, you can reach us freely. So with that, I will open up the Q&A session. So I would like to ask Yanni and Vishal to please switch on your cameras, and we can now tackle the Q&A session. So let's see what we have in store. So I will stop sharing my screen and we can get this going.
Vishal, if we move to the top, I see there's the first question that you said you would like to answer live. So maybe you can start with that one.
Yes, thank you. The SAICE has a division. It's called the ICT division, which is largely related to the technology type discussions that we're having now. And when you join the institution, you are welcome to choose the ICT division as your preferred division or your choice, and then you are able to engage on these kind of discussions related to technology, with the division members. And I think that in that way, you can help grow your knowledge and your contributions towards technology as it pertains to the civil engineering industry. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Vishal. I see a question that I would take, right? Does this mean this technology can assist with cost estimates of the project? 100%. That is what we call the parametric nature and the dimension of BIM that affords the professional. So you could actually estimate from a civil perspective, if you're doing earthworks, for example, you can get the cut and fill, you can add a bulkage factor, depending on the type of material that you're filling. You could get the structural volumes, for example, of your road, layer by layer, and it just builds on like that. That is where this is so powerful, because if you get the detailed quantities, you could cost better, become more economical. And if you are tendering for projects as a consultant, it makes you much more competitive. So definitely a very big added benefit of the BIM technology space.
Thanks,
Yanni,
yes.
Just before we carry on, in the interest of time, I scanned through the questions, and two questions were making a big, were important enough to be asked a few times. One was the cost of BIM and the ability for individuals and small firms to take advantage of BIM. And I think that was, one of the questions. And the other one was the actual, usage of the BIM and the technology that pertains to BIM. So maybe if we can answer those two questions, it would, we would be able to achieve quite a few, of the objectives, and then go to specific questions, if you don't mind, because I think we're a little bit short on time.
Great, definitely I will. It's probably because I talk too much. Yes, you are right that the question of the cost did come up quite a lot here. Oftentimes when it comes to cost, I'm not sure how many of the individuals on this call knows that from an Autodesk point of view, the license model is on a subscription basis. And in the technology world, everything is moving to subscription. And we're seeing that allows a lower cost of entry for medium-sized firms. And oftentimes, because of the subscription model, we see that not necessarily everyone is adopting BIM across the entire organization, but it's more done on a project-by-project basis, so that you can assign that cost and work it into the project cost. Then another thing to always mention about when it comes to cost is that, the cost needs to weigh up with the benefits. And in most cases, other types of successful BIM projects and stats and reports out there all say that the return on investment is there. So whilst the cost is high, the return is also high. We recently, it was actually a BIM podcast that I listened to when they spoke about, how do you actually measure the benefits in this ROI? And you ideally actually want the same project to run concurrently, one where BIM is being applied and one where BIM isn't being applied, so that you can see the difference. But one of the consultants who was part of this roundtable said, it's almost difficult to put into words the benefits, because the benefit was there was no error. So they couldn't report on the amount of errors because there were none. So always remember, at least from our statistics and what we've seen, is that the return trumps the initial cost and investment for that. Then something that comes up, and it actually comes up quite frequently, is this actually a viable solution or a road to go down for small and medium-sized firms? I haven't seen this in the civil engineering space yet. I come from a building and architectural background, but definitely in the building and architectural space, we're actually seeing that because smaller organizations are embracing technology, they get to compete with the bigger organizations. 5 people can do one thing the old way, that one person can do the new way, because they've got technology that's aiding them. So we're actually seeing that smaller organizations are winning these big projects because they've got the technology and these optimized processes to back them up. So oftentimes the adoption of this actually gives you that competitive edge over the massive consulting firms who also have massive overheads. Then what was the second kind of question?
I could add to what you've just said from a civil perspective. So before we get to the second part of that question, from a civil engineering perspective, what I have seen is, yes, the point is valid that the initial startup costs are expensive, especially for small or medium-sized enterprises. But what I have seen small enterprises actually doing, or small companies, is if they're having the right people and they are using the correct processes, you might have people that are just using one type of BIM technology, for example, right? Because of them having the specialized skill set as a small individual company, the bigger consultants are actually outsourcing the work to them. So it creates an opportunity indirectly that, fine, you might not have the upfront cost at this stage to actually do a project, but the opportunity still comes to you to render your services out there to implement that. And what it has led to many small companies doing is JVing with the larger consultants, where they are now put on a pedestal to compete on bigger and global projects. And once they have their feet and they've gained their recognition, or they have made up their ROI, that's when they invest fully into it. So it might not be a complete plunge, but it's a gradual process into getting into that. So you must keep in mind, you need to look at your company as its whole, as its mission statement, what you offer, where you would want to go, and stream and step it accordingly. You have to eat an elephant bit by bit, right? So that is the same methodology that you would apply here, but don't let that limitation of not being able to embrace BIM fully not allow you to even embrace it in bits and pieces. That's what I would like to say from civil perspective.
Yanni, that second question was, what is the step one for someone who has not used BIM in the past, in the civil engineering context? What is step one in terms of wanting to start working with BIM?
For me, the step one is to get an understanding of, if you want to start BIM, what do you want to get out of it? What is the immediate organizational issue or project challenge that you want to address? And that might be different for different individuals. Some might say, I need to start BIM because I'm losing projects. Others might say, I need to start using BIM because, you know, we have massive issues with errors or meeting project deadlines. Once you have defined your purpose, you need to get an understanding of what your current state and current competency level is. And then from there on, you can start your BIM journey. One of the key things in any kind of BIM journey is always the move from 2D to 3D. But oftentimes, a lot of organizations already either have access to 3D technology, and it's just a case of how do you use 3D technology in a BIM way. And then from there on, you go through what's required for your people, your processes, and forward. But for me, getting to understand what's your BIM goal, and then what's your current state, is always the first place to start in any type of BIM journey.
Oh, thanks. I didn't plan to become the master of ceremonies.
Thank you for that.
But I think perhaps the next question would be around, do you have any anecdotal comments related to efficiencies that BIM has brought to a business, in terms of okay, it's money in, money out, but what are we gaining in the process in terms of efficiencies? Are you able to share any comments from your experiences with the organizations that have adopted it? Are they delivering projects faster? Are the profitability on the projects improving? Do you have any estimates of percentages perhaps that you could share, rough broadly, to give a feel for the value of adopting technology such as this in your businesses?
It's perhaps not a percentage, but one of the BIM projects that we took on a couple of years ago, and this was the first BIM project that the organization had embarked on. So it's not kind of their fifth or their sixth one. They were about 2 weeks early with council submission and tender drawings. Time is money. 2 weeks extra means you've got 2 weeks to go and spend on another project. If we start looking at, I'm very passionate about information management, so that's why you'll hear me talk about that quite a lot. If we're simply just looking at the amount of time that individuals spend on trying to find the right information and then the results of not finding the right information, if you just cut that out, that is usually where, and that's typically something easy to start with. And that is where you see massive changes. I'm not sure if Shuhaib from his experience can add anything.
Sure, thanks, Yanni. So from my dealings with civil companies, consultants, they don't really measure the actual metrics of it here in South Africa yet. And the reason why is once they have adopted this process, they just keep going, because now it frees them up. Like Yanni says, it gives you more capacity to land more projects, to think out of the box, to land international projects. The thing that I've heard here in South Africa is a lot of the consultants are working on projects or landed projects that are, for example, like in Saudi Arabia, those type of regions, some in Europe, because of the competitive edge that they have created. So they've not had the chance to sit back and look at the metrics and say, wow, this is what we have done, because of being in that loop. However, if you want to look at projects that have detailed metrics, they are normally given in percentages, right? They are readily available online. Again, the reference we would use is Autodesk, but if you go and look at the customer success stories, you can even filter it by segment. So if you go to civil engineering or civil infrastructure, you'll hear directly from those teams where they manage to actually quantify it and give you metrics that you can see. But all of them bottom line say that you're getting more work, you're getting more projects. And because something is so beneficial and so new, even by the thesis that I've read, you just keep going and no one really quantifies it. End of the day, it is a winning recipe through and through.
Okay, no, thanks. I'll leave it to yourself and doubling, finish off the...
Great. If I may, there was one or two other questions that slightly related around, it also ties into the cost, but again, to where do you start? And then also kind of like whose responsibility is it to actually drive this? So for me, in terms of, other than what I mentioned about the BIM goals and the assessing your current state, I would not recommend to any individual to just wake up one morning and say, tomorrow we as an organization are BIMing. It's something that needs to be on a project by project basis. And like Shuhaib said, you know, how do you eat